organization asked me to introduce Hilary Sample and Michael Meredith of the firm MOS. And I'm very pleased to do that because Michael and Hilary are old friends and also they're whose work on all range of topics I'm very interested in. But in doing an introduction for them, I found that it's somewhat difficult to do a conventional introduction, but I can try, at least try a few formats, or let you know a few formats I tried out. The first was simply just to explain the firm, as one does, to say that Michael and Hilary are principals of the firm MOS, which is based in New York City. But if you want to go much further than that and take a look at the firm profile on their website, you'll see that it's somewhat evasive, to say the least. It will simply tell you that they don't really believe in firm profiles. They think that they're relatively uninformative, that the firm was founded sometime, maybe 10 years ago-ish, but they're not quite sure, in a place that they don't quite remember. I asked Michael for a little bit more information about this particular line of thinking about the firm, the kind of biographical introduction, and he said to simply tell you all something about Hilary and Michael's hardscrabble beginnings and the fact that they are misunderstood creative outcasts looking for an authentic expression in a world of hustlers and fakers. So that's one possibility, because as you can see, we don't get much from that kind of biographical introduction. So second on the list would be to go through projects, to go through notable projects and try to lay out something of the scope of their work that way, which seems easy enough to do. We can talk, starting close to home, about their installation Without Out. It was at the List Center for the Arts, List Visual Arts Center a few years ago, or their installation at PS1, which I'm sure has crossed your paths at some point. A couple of installations at two Venice Biennale, including the most recent one, their participation in the MoMA Foreclosed exhibition, and then of course their architecture, Element House, which is well known already at this point, the Krabbesholm School building in Denmark, and so forth. But if I continue down this line of introduction, I'm talking about projects, I have to begin to read out titles such as Glimmering Noise, Rainbow Vomit, and so forth, and again we end up in a kind of area that's not very explicative, to say the least. So two more possibilities. One of them is simply to say that they're global architects in the genre of kind of global architect that we would think today, and I would say this because their practice has now produced work in the US, in Canada, in Northern Europe, in Southern Europe. There's one project for a site in Africa, but then most recently they're working on an orphanage in Kathmandu, Nepal, and it just seems kind of silly to talk about a global architect working in Kathmandu, Nepal. It seems like an entirely different kind of category. So then we might simply say, okay, these are architects who are participating in a kind of, or endeavoring to produce a kind of total architecture, a la Gropius, or in more contemporary vein, say Michael Graves, the building to the teapot, and so forth. And I could do this because they've produced furniture, many kinds of furniture, they've produced and designed software, they have done an extensive amount of writing, they've done theoretical writing, historical writing. Notable example of Hilary's recent piece in Office US Agenda on the architect, the SOM architect, Natalie Floyd. They produced a range of household objects, bath mats, coat hooks, that sort of thing. They produced a series of videos. This then starts to lead us though into that sketchy territory because again, titles include things such as The Zombies Are Late and so forth, which again leads us into difficulty. In this category, there's still, and probably the final absurdity, if we start talking about things that they produce in the vein of total architecture, I'd have to include what I can only describe as stuff that they're now selling on their website. By stuff, I mean a series of reproductions that include objects such as Lily Reich's avant-garde bath soap, which you should certainly check out and purchase if you're interested. Available on www.mosarchitects.org. So really, none of these seem entirely sufficient to me as ways of explaining Michael and Hilary's work and their project overall. So the best I can do, I think, is simply to talk about, or conclude by saying that they occupy a couple of pivotal roles in contemporary practice and contemporary discourse. Michael and Hilary are both obviously designers within the firm MOS. They're also teachers. Michael Meredith teaches at Princeton University at the School of Architecture, and Hilary Sample teaches at Columbia in the GSAP. Both of them are also shop owners, small business owners, as evident from the stuff for sale on their website. And both of them, I would say, are also actors. You can watch Glimmering Noise if you want to see a sample of this acting ability. But I think they're actors in maybe a broader sense, because I always have the feeling that Michael and Hilary are, in a way, the two main characters in some prolonged, extended performance about architecture that I am very fortunate in sometimes being able to play cameo roles. Or maybe I only have a walk-on role, and that rises up to the level of cameo. But in any case, I'm delighted this evening to once again play a walk-on role in that large performance about architecture. And you all, I think, are very lucky as well to play walk-on roles in the ongoing production that is MOS. So please join me in welcoming Hilary Sample and Michael Meredith.
Basically, the format for this is just going to be to show, like the title suggests, a lot of stuff. That stuff is drawings and buildings and software. In a way, you know, I think we've tried to build. I mean, the thing that we really talk about the most in the office right now is how to construct. We're trying to think about constructing a body of work. A body of work that is a pretty flat in some level, but still cohesive. So this is a kind of challenge for us to think about. I think we see this as in a way that let's say the work has its own momentum, that we are there to sort of direct if we can to some degree. So
I think we spent some time in beginning. I think in some ways we're beginning, but I never like when architects get to a certain point and they say they're still young and they're still beginning. I mean, we are in some ways, but there's obviously another generation coming up for sure. So we just had to start, and I think for us, a lot of it was trying and experimenting with these different media. And now those things have produced a certain set of things. Objects, architecture, hopefully, and what are we now building towards in the next coming years with different kinds of projects. So it's kind of...
Yeah, I think we can just start working on what we'll start but like the first thing we're going to show, we started, it's a house that we really don't ever show very much. It's really the first thing we did. Unfortunately, this must be a common problem. The drawings just look really blown out. But it's in near Rochester on Finger Lake, I think, or near one of the Finger Lakes. And very first project in a way. Some of the things I think that we're thinking about are probably here. And you know, it's maybe under 2,000 square foot house on a lake.
The first thing really about this project is that for us it's the first house. I think now we're on house number 8 or 9, and that's one thing to probably talk a little bit about. But the first kind of experience of the house was from seeing it from the roof. So this experience of already confronting a kind of domestic type, not from sort of front door, or even I think in suburban America, understanding a kind of house through its garage or car, but really seeing the very first part of the house from its roof, and then understanding the site through this kind of a very steep site section from the top of the hill down to the lake. So these two things together informed kind of early thinking about the relationship of the house. Also, in this case of the section, but the interior typically is kind of dark, right? And sort of house, like a Victorian house or that kind of type, and especially maybe as we saw some of the buildings and houses next door to this that are very kind of small scale and being more of a lake house. Of course, you're going to be outside much more, so the insides are always really dark. So here we wanted to open that up, sort of evacuate that space to have light and air, and in this case being Rochester, snow, even sort of experience that on the inside. And,
So there's a void that cuts through that house. It's used for passive, let's say. There's sort of environmental reasons for it, for sure, and also visual reasons. And I would say that the thing about this house, which lots of little mistakes in it, which we don't really need to get into, but like the one thing I would say about it, the one thing that, there's things that have stayed in a way, I think the pitch was something that we tried to fight to some degree at the beginning, and extend it according to the landscape and distort it, things like this. And it became, I think, a search. I think the one thing that has changed since this, to some degree, was that there was a kind of search even at the beginning, which wasn't possible for us to achieve given the finances and et cetera of the project, was a kind of extremeness, perhaps even trying to distort things or shift them. And I think that we kind of, I think after that experience, we somehow moved. We realized that wasn't the way to go. So at the same time when we're doing these, like this house, we've always done little objects. Can't explain it why. There's no good reason. It never works out great for objects. But like there's always a kind of interest in things. So this is a code hook system we did years ago. Kind of self-explanatory in a way. It's sort of a kind of problem of repetition to some degree, like an aggregation of these branching systems. Kind of at the same time, sort of doing rugs. These were kind of objects unfolded, looking at the time at thinking about kind of objects kind of exploded into surfaces, and then we ran these scripts which are the kind of digital mold, literally looking at how mold works and kind of growing. We cast all these in like, the things you do. I don't know how much we really want to get into all of it, but graphite. We were obsessed with like Mies. I don't even know if it's true, but these stories about Mies putting graphite in his black paint so that the buildings look more like drawings. I have no idea. Detlef Burton's I think told us that, and it seemed like so exciting to think that you could really affect the world and try to find this space that is like where the building is like the drawing. Somehow the representational and the real space gets totally screwed up. This was done at Henry Orbach's gallery in New York, if anybody remembers that. But the house number 2, I guess, I don't know how we're describing these now. But, you want to go one time close?
So this was a second house, so really third. We were teaching and living in Toronto, so this is in Point Barrow. It's about very small islands. This is about 3 acres, and many interesting things about this area, this particular site. The client owned it's in the shape of a horseshoe, a U. So it has an interior, so this photo is taken really from the interior of the island, which is a kind of unusual form. They had an existing boathouse that was failing structurally, kind of leaning due to the freeze thaw and just something almost 100 years old, so that needed to be replaced. So as we were talking with them, kind of concern over the Great Lakes and the shifting water, sort of at the time it was kind of fluctuating, somewhat rising, but then also how to think about producing a new space for them and their friends and their family that would come visit during the summer months. Really, it's only accessible from May to September, so a very short window, which in a way also started to build upon some of the themes from the first house about kind of passive. This house is actually, there's no heat, there's no air conditioning. It's completely, there's no sort of artificial comfort control, it's just what it is. But also how to think about ways in which you can have multiple families staying on this very sort of small and very rugged plot of land. So one of the things we thought about was how it could float in the event that the water would rise more, that they would actually need to move it, so it could stay close. We did, the first project was a little sleeping cottage here, and then we worked on this. But the idea was that eventually they would want to build other little cottages. I have to say, this was when the economy, when the dollar was very low. Now it's almost not possible in some ways, but to connect from one side to the other through the boathouse without actually having to go inside. So thinking about it much more as almost kind of urban strategy. It sounds kind of crazy for a little island, but that there could be these different sort of publics, let's say, moving through.
And when we did which isn't shown here, we did do a master plan for them of five of these objects, basically the same thing repeated over and over again in different sort of situations in turn. So, I mean, I think there's...
So part of it was also finding a way to build, I mean, being the second thing that we were building. At this point, we had moved back to the States for teaching jobs, and we had to find a way to communicate with the contractors. So we took basically all the feed we got and printed a 3D model. And it's about a huge model, and we sent it. It was later blown off the frame and lost, but essentially they really built the project through the model and through Flickr, which was a kind of new technology at the time, uploading photos, which we would look at almost every day and try to understand the process of how they were constructing this. I think one of the things also we've played a lot with in all the projects going forward is really thinking about the relationship to the site. And again, this is one of the things all architects say, but how a lot of our projects are in these kind of extreme sites and with a lot of panoramas usually. And it's very easy to always give the kind of panoramic view or the sort of view, the TV screen view, surround sounds kind of thing, but we try to look at things in different grounds, foreground, background, and we try to show them with these different experiences. Okay. And
but like it was a pivotal project, as always. At the beginning, I think the ideas. The thing I would say is like a lot of the ideas were very slow at some level. I think the furniture and stuff is faster, but the architecture we kind of have a few ideas that kind of work through projects a little bit at a time, and we are interested in this kind of problem of repetition, this problem of a kind of generic or almost this it's not contextual, I don't think of it as contextualist, but it's something that is a kind of, generic, but related to a vernacular, but not contextual at some level still.
But I think coming back to some of the, talking about the first house and the sort of extreme shape form, that in this case the floating house is closer to this idea we work with maybe more now, the idea of just a generic vernacular.
Yeah, and then it's more about this, like the nuance of how it's situated, or like its relationship to other things maybe more than it's like, it's like one of sculptural qualities in its own right. Although, here we go. So,
this is the artist studio for a client who is a painter who also does drawings, his wife, who live in New York City, but want some property in upstate New York, and wanted to think about how you could transition and have space outside of the city for drawing and painting. How to create, in a way, a kind of loft, but in the country or in nature, and already having a sort of collection of metal objects on the site, so Quonset had an airstream. There's already a kind of very strong interest in metals.
Right now, I think these projects, all the projects, there's a kind of brutal economy to them. It's hard maybe to tell, but like, for instance, as I'm sure all of us kind of architects know, these are projects that are, there's nothing over it's like $200 a square foot projects, et cetera. And it's really about finding certain economies that you can tap into at some level when you're trying to build. It's not necessarily glamorous stuff for academia, but it is one of the problems of being an architect. So for this particular case, the roof trusses, we knew there's like two companies that produce all the roof trusses everywhere in the Northeast. It seems like they don't really care what the trusses are. It's actually the only few times I actually believed in mass customization arguments, which tend to turn out to, from my experience, not really pan out. But in this particular case, roof trusses, you can go crazy with them. So in case you guys want to do that. And then there's basically, the form is at some level incredibly conventional, but then slightly tweaked due to these moment frames on the ends, and then wrapped in a zinc cladding.
So think a little bit about maintenance and zinc and
It's basically, it's basically, it's all open. One of the problems is just sort of these evacuated, hollowed out spaces, which I think, for whatever reason, has been part of our work. Almost, there's almost like there's no composition or no plans on the interiors of these things. It happens mostly on the exterior. So, Bordeaux next, which relates to, is basically a Mongolian villa, and a series of these objects forms, which are related to the previous work, but also to kind of whole sort of contemporary probably projects, sort of all put together in a from corner to corner, where you can move through them. Kind of parametric models was done in Katia, looking at the sun angles, how the environment starts to affect the shapes and forms of these things. This kind of dreadful model, which is sort of endearing now. It's so badly built. And then this was our first attempt at filming, really, for, at the time there was a real crisis for, I think, a lot of people involved in the project, of a kind of strange crisis, but just a crisis of subjectivity almost, of like not really understanding who the client was. Like, who are the people that are going to live or occupy these buildings? So, for us,
a strange sense of the program that was given, which every program had a small and a large. So something we had to work with.
So we made this little movie at the time. I think it was really for us. I mean, it really was for us to think through the problem of who these people are. And of course, the people there are fairly generic at some level. They could be almost anybody, anywhere, it seemed like. But it somehow helped us somehow connect to the building and the place somehow. At the same time, with all these things, I think this is a little out of sequence, but we've always been playing, you know, always interested in, let's say, the tools of architecture, the modes of representation, etc. Started really working with processing, with actually somebody from Media Lab here, Simon Greenwald, and who was writing the particle physics, the particle libraries for Casey and Ben's software early on. He was like one of the first guys in there. And starting to work with him and then developing these kind of very simple childish things, these little knocking blocks over, incredibly pleasurable, silly things. And then developing that into kind of throwing cubes into containers and around objects, and they had no place. I mean, really, we did this without, in a way, without any idea of what they would become. This particular one, we were doing this, and then met with Tobias Putri, who's a really great artist in Cambridge, and we started to then develop other work with him, a whole body of work. And his work definitely influenced us, and hopefully vice versa, but who knows. And started to think about these kinds of problems of aggregation, which we already were thinking about at maybe a certain scale, but starting to think about them at another scale, a kind of tectonic scale almost. And then worked on, we did this, which this is Rainbow Vomit. Kind of comes from that, and then, yeah, spent a lot of time figuring out what kind of glitter. I think we rated seriously every Michael. This is so embarrassing. It's like somehow Michael is like the worst of the worst kitsch for me. But like we rated, we got glitter from every Michael's in like a 50-mile radius until they were totally ran out. Remember that? So, another piece of furniture, it happens in the meantime. We've gotten incredibly good. I would say the one thing that happens when you get older, amongst many things, is like I think we've really started to care a lot more about craft of the architectural object in a way that we really didn't. It sounds horribly cliche, but like we've gotten really good at trying to find modes of working in our projects that we're still developing. So we have incredibly good relationships now with ceramicists, metal workers, wood workers, etc., that we can start we figure out how to work with them and how to work with the material more directly. So we're doing a lot of metal in proximity. We don't unfortunately have photographs of it yet, but some of the work that we have under it's just finishing construction. So PS1. After party. We did. I mean, the joke was always that we did have. We lost PS1 more than anybody, and we did do it like 3 times, and then we found we were almost not going to do it, and then I think you realized the good thing about having the 2 of us is that we tend to, when we're in conversations on projects, like one of us will be like, this is awful, I hate this client, or I hate this project, or there's no way we're going to do it, and the other one will be like, it's going to be great. Just work through it, it's going to be fantastic. And then it kind of cycles around like that for a while.
It's interesting to hear you talk about the interest in craft, because this project was literally held together with zip ties.
Yeah.
So,
it's a sort of craft, though. I mean,
not the aluminum tubes, but.
But these, yeah. I mean,
This is my favorite part of the project, is the
most
base.
inventive kind of thing.
Because you couldn't put anything in the ground permanently, so you had to be able to remove everything. So there's other pipes that go underground with another disc that can lift it.
So you could backfill it, and the weight of the soil was enough to prevent overturning. I mean, the thing that was interesting about this, and all the projects I would say have been an incredible learning curve for us. I mean, that's the kind of amazing life of an architect. I mean, there's not too many professions that you, I mean, maybe there are, hopefully not in medicine, but like, that you really learn on the job. You know what I mean? Like, you are figuring out things, because it's all being made up at the time. So, like, you know, we knew that we wanted to work with standardized clamps. We went to every engineer we knew that we wanted to work with, that would be willing to work with us probably. And they're all like, you know, we can't calculate this, it's too light in a way, a structure for kind of traditional engineering. What they all recommended was just doing mock-ups and testing to failure, which is what we did do. So we ended up learning in this incredibly directly empirical way. And there were a lot of moments, I mean, these, the smokestack chimneys, they went through a whole range of different kind of scratching our head, because, you know, they're like 40 to 45 feet tall, and just worried about wind loading. And it was the rainiest, windiest summer on record, I think, or something, right? And the thatch was stinky, sort of wet most of the time. Anyways, and so, not moving, I guess. After this was the first time we thought we would try to film the thing, and
I think we've just gone through a whole period of projects that were very temporary and at a certain scale. So while we had built 2 houses and the artist studio was just finished, certainly the downturn in the economy just brought what it brought in terms of projects. You can't predict in a way the kind of practice, at least not, I think, in the beginning, and you're small and you kind of want to stay small and want to do a certain kind of work. So we did a lot of temporary projects and felt that they were, you know, these kind of discrete moments, and could we think about, you know, make more out of them, basically. I think that's the thing that's probably drives some of the work also, whether it's the coat hooks or the furniture, that can there be more questions that come from it, and what would it mean to think about something more kind of contemporary? What are the bounds of what's contemporary?
I think maybe all of these are kind of certain outlets for certain anxieties or desires or whatever. You know, where we can't, I mean, there's no text really in any of this stuff. I mean, there's some, usually, you know, it's like we could think about architecture through the movies in a different way, even if it's very obliquely. I mean, most of the texts and the scripts for these things are, you know, thoughts or jokes even, or whatever on the field of architecture. We usually are scrambling people's names in there that we know, or you know, sort of playing with, or we're for us, they were just working through things. I mean, even if they go nowhere, and they really do go nowhere. I mean, generally in most of the movies, the structure is such that they just repeat. So, this is one of the few that we really got to keep on. And for us, it was really a thought about the avant-garde to some degree. An idea of an avant-garde, sort of this, that gets destroyed by a mechanical system that breaks down eventually. So, for this kind of encampment that they've had for a while, sort of false archaeology. I don't know if you, like, you know, growing up, it was a with like In Search of and Leonard Nimoy. So it has that kind of these TV shows that were kind of about the mysteries of the world. It was kind of framed in that way, these kind of fake archaeologies. Yeah, but this is the only one where we let the people like free. Most everybody's they kind of can't get out. But like the Allen House, I did change the order. I'm sorry. It was too late that time.
So this is a visitor center, also guest house for a museum based in Denver, Museum of Outdoor Arts, that is supporting a land artist in this site in New Mexico. He's finishing his project soon, so he's going to go and stay here. And this project started around the same time as PS1, and is just finishing now. So again, this idea of slow project and just taking a long time.
Right, where the irony is like it was done in sips, and the basic form of the whole thing was done in like a few weeks. And it's just been, because it's so remote, it just has been taking, it's like, watching water drop from a faucet. It's just like, it's been incredibly slow, but it's almost done. And it would really start off, I would say, sightless. I mean, that really was the thing. I think the client is a really interesting client. She runs this institution, like Hilary said, and I think this is like kind of the after effect of the MoMA, in a way, prefab show. She became obsessed with this idea of architecture at this scale. Somehow, I have no clue. I honestly have no clue how we get clients. I still don't understand how that works. Can't even remember how we met her. She's been fantastic, interesting conversations, very, like, we did all these movies, and we showed them to her, and she just was like, I don't understand any of it, but it looks interesting, kind of thing. But she's been, most people would run away. And she's been incredibly open and great in the process of things. So these are some of the interiors, unfinished, because these are from maybe last year. It's just now getting photographed finally, this in 2 weeks. Small pavilion.
So really maybe a kind of scaling up from some of the tables. But this was built in like 2 days, everything, very fast. So, I mean, sort of, was talking a little bit about global practice, and there's lots of questions about how that really works. But as a small office, it's, everyone's kind of global practice now. But
I really want to, it's one of these things I think it's interesting to show, only because it's one of those things like you get an email and they say we need a design in 2 weeks or less in the middle of at the end of the semester or something, and you start to think, okay, well, what do we want to do? And part of it was this thought for us, like, how far can we push the furniture, literally, like that space between the furniture and the architecture, and try to find something that really can be both, like this other scale. It still reads to me like a table, and like with small people, kind of miniaturized people, only because we had worked on tables, which we haven't shown here, which are almost similar, identical, not pink though, and starting to, just for us, kind of an opportunity to think about those kinds of effects in a way of scale. More software. This was for actually kind of competition, I think, that we were invited to do something in China to look at, like a large-scale development, and we couldn't figure out how to design anything, so we just started looking at these kind of X's. and starting to just produce methods of which we're having, kind of just clustering all these things together to produce kind of urban forms. I think we were calling them campus domains. I just think they turned out. We couldn't do basically we left the competition because we were, I think, having more fun doing this, and we realized the client, there's no way they were going to be interested in it. Other software pieces, just basically playing around with springs and rigid bodies of spheres and trying to find these aggregated forms, like balloons. This is for the Venice Biennale. Other movies we did. This was for afterwards. It was part of a log, a short log. I didn't tell it over. I'm sorry.
So this project started probably around the same time as the Venice Biennale, thinking about, I think there's a kind of sequence of projects from PS1 to Venice to here that helped in thinking about relationships between people and ideas of culture, let's say, and how to create a kind of culture about comfort practices and being maybe more inclusion of things. And so we were asked by the director of the school Kabersholm, which is in Ski in Denmark. It's one of the oldest arts, oldest arts high school, before high school, after high school, before college. Students go for about a semester to study different art, graphic design, photography, architecture, and on the campus, which is some of these buildings here, these sort of, this is the Australian some photos of the campus. And that housed both studios, but also students were living in these buildings, and there's a whole other part of the campus further down in the drawing with the main sort of hall here. And so the director was trying to understand the ways of how to bring all the studios essentially together on one side of the campus. And there's a house we're working part of here. And so we were invited to think about, so you can see what kind of context or what we were building in proximity to. So some of these things that we've been interested in, the type and form of the vernacular, is also adjacent to water, and there's some very industrial, abstract metal buildings, which we like a lot. So here, but just ideas of roof, for instance, became very important. And so he asked us, we sort of started the project with, we flew to New York after basically 6 months of emails and phone calls, and met and said, okay, he would give us 2 weeks to do something, just to see, again, it's kind of how you start something. And so we did these studies, which he liked, and he said, okay, 2 more weeks, and we just kind of worked that way basically for 2 years. So the project, unlike mostly everything else, was incredibly fast. And so we started to look at these forms for the studios. So there are 4 studios, all treated more or less the same. This idea of repetition again, but slightly small, subtle changes in terms, particularly here, let's say how then creating a kind of roof that overhangs to create an outside porch. So you're sort of neither totally outside nor totally inside, but also through these kind of square windows, really create a very open relationship across the studios, and being able to see what someone in architecture might be doing versus somebody in fashion, and to have that kind of sort of cross-view to the different disciplines. And,
I think it was important also that we were really, one of the things that we did with the models and testing was the thinness of the buildings became really important so that you could always, you could see through, you can see through them, so you can see the people working, but you can also see outside of them, or the shared courtyard space, which has grass there now, and start to build a kind of sense of, in a really in a basic way, a sense of communication or community between all of them, where they didn't really have that before. And so one of the things like that was for us, and I think about the project, which is completely was actually incredibly exciting, is that we really tried to insist that they put a lot of chairs underneath all the porches, which for us was kind of, we've never really had the luxury of even proposing things like this before to anybody. So, and they did it, and it seems to work quite well. Everyone seems surprisingly happy. Maybe it's Denmark, so.
It's also a project with a very low budget, and so things like how to clad, it's a rain screen, and we looked at, in this case, it's a cementitious panel, but the joints between the panels were a place that we could be more playful in that, so there's a kind of spacing. It's a sort of aluminum channel behind, so the light at times hits it and does something different than if it had been kind of hairline. So we were invited, one of 5 teams for Foreclosed, and we had to pick, or suggest which of the, I think there were 8 different cities in the US that were up for our study. And so we selected Orange, New Jersey, in part because of its relationship to New York City, and I think to sort of push some of the issues, again, of type, of thinking about what it means to work in the context of a place that we were being asked to look at for this issue of Foreclosed, when we found, in fact, there were other urban issues, not just a suburban problem, but actually an urban problem, and particularly dealing with the subject, obviously, of housing, but relationships to live, work, issues around different economies, how to produce new economies, and if we were to redevelop something in Orange, in this particular neighborhood, this transit village, what could it be? And to look at a kind of private property that could be turned into public property, what was left, and we found really one of the things that was left actually were the streets. And so
yeah, and for us, this is I think it's a theoretical project, but I think possible in small doses for sure. I think the kind of, let's say, anxiety or whatever was the problem of thinking at a large scale again in terms of cities, which I think is a kind of crisis, perhaps, for a lot of people who are trying to do this, because we were focusing on a kind of, even when we were making little movies, we had a sort of imaginary conversations with people like Ed Lowe or Jane Jacobs, and starting to think about the failures of, let's say, large-scale urbanization in the 60s, and because the exhibition moment was also tied into a whole bunch of that kind of history of exhibitions, let's say, on architects and kind of interventions in the cities, which a lot of the schools participated in previously. And the thing is, for us, is could we think both at an incredibly large scale and a small scale? And then once you started to figure out a site for that intervention of that, it becomes impossible, because property is so, like, to do something in one block is like 20 different property owners, and you know that there's no way, you could even get any consensus. So the only space left for that is kind of even remotely public is the street, which actually is, the more you look at the street and who kind of has rights on the street, it's not as public as we all think. So the question was, could we use this street as a kind of ground for new social kind of like a kind of nonprofit social development, where the city is kind of the developer now, and we worked with Ed Glazer on financial models. And I think
it's also a kind of commentary on the subject of zoning. It sounds very dry and boring, but it's incredibly exciting to think about how cities are developed, at least in this country, particularly in New York City, and its kind of history, sort of leading the country in these issues, and how the relationship between lived work could potentially be rethought, especially since we're no longer doing heavy manufacturing in the majority of our cities, but some light manufacturing that could be complementary with kind of lived work situation. So in this case, pink is work and white is live, or vice versa. It was just a model that didn't have to be a kind of typical ground floor development for commercial. Also a lot of issues around the subject of public health and exposing stairs everywhere, and really trying to push some of these things that at the time, say, the Bloomberg administration has been leading, and now we see it being developed in other cities. Or how is it that Orange could be so close to New York and yet have problems of unemployment and food deserts and these things that seemed starting with. So of course, I'm really excited about that. But we also looked at it as a material problem, a structural problem, sort of referencing aerated concrete.
We wanted to look at the kind of brutalism of concrete, in the past, and rethink it again. That was part of that history of large-scale development.
It also came out of Edison's houses, this idea of suburban developments, but also the width of it, referencing kind of very thin, almost brownstone type construction, which goes back to the kind of lot in each city that you see emerge at the turn of the 1900s and just before.
And then also working through for the exhibition kind of movie scenario. So starting to sort of produce almost a charter that's all out of order.
This project is an orphanage and library, and also park, largely about education for children and also women in Kathmandu. Builds, those are in the last 6 months, the photographs of it being under construction. Anyway, building in the site is interesting, sort of coming out of talking about Orange and zoning. In this case, there's really no building codes, except for there are structural requirements because it's seismic, being in ways. So it's a very high, something like 9 on the Richter scale. So the idea that in this case, the building can also serve as a kind of emergency refuge in the event of some horrendous earthquake. But that was basically the only sort of code. So this project was as much about its kind of form and sort of form finding as it is about the general sort of requirements of sort of life-sustaining project. The client is very interested in issues of sustainability. So this could be a project that supports itself. I think there's a number of these types of projects now. We're seeing more and more. This is a project that we've been working on for 4 or 5 years, so in a way, at the kind of beginning of these ambitions.
The structural logic, I mean, comes from a lot of the seismic in a way concerns, but also it's just kind of how things are built, which is this kind of 30-centimeter concrete frame with brick infill, and we also, the idea was just to densify the frame and remove the infill.
Also, the kind of issue around children and kids and security, so that as the part of it is about kind of creating some certain level of transparency from inside the building looking out, but also a way to see sort of who's coming and going. So the stairs are as much about being very connected in between, but also revealing, particularly at the ground, where everyone is at all times. And as the building goes up and also sort of cants in, becoming more domestic, even in its form, but also in its kind of intimacy. The publicness of the ground is a library. The second floor was a dining space. So this is sort of the library space, dining, dormitories, and smaller classroom for children. The entire thing is sort of planted and serves as education with the purpose of also trying to connect virtually with other schools around the region before we move on to promote education.
But like, you know, it turns into small, this is a proposal for a pavilion in France.
Students.
Looking at crumbling, these are all in a way years old, crumbling of these kinds of surfaces. So, you know, basically just like as silly as the blocks tumbling, this is just like you have this surface, it's kind of a handkerchief in a way. You click on it and it flies up in the air and falls down, and it sort of produces these, in some cases it just crumples up, or sometimes it produces a semi-stable form. And then looking at that stuff, you know, there is a kind of thing of how to use these things that we do. So this is a kind of recent project in Miami, just being asked to do a facade for this very weird, it's kind of the commercial version of Ordos or something, kind of street scenario where there's every architect, a lot of them from LA, it seems like, get a little portion of the street to do a facade. So what do you do in that scenario? Is what we did. So, you know, you start to think about kind of in a very, these things. I mean, I still think there's so much potential. For us, it's like, the exciting thing is it takes a while, but then there are these moments of something happens in the office. Like, for instance, isn't that different in a way than Rainbow Vomit? It's just played out in a different way. I mean, it's not, it's just now just, you know, shapes. In thinking about that, I feel like there's still a ton of potential for these things as literally thinking about facades or windows, etc. This would be a really awesome facade. It's still working through it. So this is it's basically marble veneer rain screen system, 3 feet deep, to make these things appear more like holes, and then there's sort of glass there. So this is still, there's a perking, we're still working through that. House in upstate that's starting construction soon. Just to show smaller little things, this is a thing at the Venice Biennale with Luci which is still up. It's basically this legend, you know.
History of Pompeii and some of the methods of kind of archaeology, but all these blocks were made
these are all resin, and there's a material in here. This material is related to a lot of research that Lucia and some PhDs have worked on in terms of cataloging or indexing the materiality of a kind of real wall in Pompeii. And these get, they become part of the recipe of these blocks. And then the blocks we wanted to give them away. They kind of wanted us to slow it down. That was the most interesting part of the whole conversation, I feel like, was the debate about how fast, if it could go away. And so really, Lucia developed a kind of system of obsolescence. I was kind of happy to let it go immediately, but I think it would turn out more interesting like this, actually. So, and you can see, the thing that was kind of exciting was just to watch interaction like this. There are people who just will do whatever it takes to get some, like they're basically all the same. I mean, there's differences in the material and things, but like somebody will see a block there and it's just like, I don't care about whatever, anything else, and just grab it, and it knocks everything over. So you end up with these piles of rubble. And what Tim was saying at the beginning, I think we're just going to end on this kind of return to stuff, which is how we started as architects, and continue to produce, like, litter the world. I think these are objects. We've been doing these objects. We set up, I think, had an obsession with like kind of Etsy over the summer. We would, and also this idea of what do you do as how do you find other models for stuff? Yeah. So we've been working on just making things. And you know, these are the scented candles, and we will make up these stories. They're all kind of faux reproductions of supposedly architectural objects. So this is this supposedly soap that Lily Reich made while she was a student at the back. And they're all kind of, the stories are such that it's always kind of really questioning the role of authorship to some degree too. It's like the yellow stool is supposedly was a doodle that was erased while Bob Venturi was working for Louis Kahn on the margins of a piece of paper, that somehow we found this erased doodle and made an object out of it. And so at one level, they're completely ridiculous, but another level, we think that they kind of allow us to start thinking about the possibilities of other potential forms of a kind of disciplinary narratives, let's say, or something. You know, I don't know how we end these things. It's like a beginning, sort of. Okay, we can just rewind the tape. Okay, that's our office.
Thank you.
I really prefer questions anyways at the lectures, so if there are any, or if there aren't any. Yeah.
So you mentioned in your part of the piece about the possible fiction of the graphite and stuff.
Yeah.
So you mentioned in your part of the piece.
It's okay, I can hear you.
Here's the button. Okay. You mentioned in your cover piece the possible fiction of the graphite and Mises' work, and now you're returning to sort of take the story under feet in these objects. Was that always part of the path, or are you just coming back to it? In the things, were the things always in dialogue with either plausible architectural history or possible architectural history, or is it?
No, I think when I'm not going to just give you a kind of basic answer, but like I think the objects, the things that we like about doing them is in a way, at least in our education, we were always, like, we were trying to think of the stuff, like the worst possible stuff that architects hate. Really, seriously, we sit around there, we still have a huge list we're working through. But like scented candles, you know, like that to me is like, you know, that's why the first one was the scented candle, because it's about Loos and Hoffman, and we made up this idea that Loos was once a student of Hoffman, but I have no clue if it's really true. But it seemed like it confused the situation in a productive, maybe horribly awful way, I have no idea, but for us it was productive. And that dialectical model can get played with. So, you know, like, you know, when we were talking, it's like either you were corrupt, especially in the critical, let's say, years, or whatever we call them that. Like, you know, if you were a Hoffman person, that would have been like an insult. That would get thrown around like you were, like you know, with Graves, I'm sure, like Eisman thinks like that crap for Target is like the death of him, I'm sure, or before that. And it might be, but the strange thing is always, you know, I don't know, we still like this stuff and we wanted to figure out how to work with it. I don't know what we do with it. I mean, I don't feel like it's like a, you know, we're trying to find some other space occupied, but still dealing with our own baggage. So it's probably there, but I've never, like Hilary's right, like we still have to try to figure out the work. When she was saying, like, on the airplane ride over, we're like, okay, so what are we going to say? And I think we have a sense of what we're doing, but, you know, we try to put a lot into it, but then at the same time, it's always evasive to us. You know, you constantly are working, you know, that's the thing that's good about making things, is at some point the things are much smarter and more interesting than you are. You know, they can change over time, and they can lead, you can look back at something that you did years ago, and all of a sudden something else will come out of it. So, I don't know. What do you think?
Lastly, is the limited edition part of the joke as well? Or just like, you have to think of?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're like, so they're kind of horribly priced all by the way. So the problem is we tend to really want to make everything, this is a kind of late modernist thing, like we really do want everything to be as cheap as possible. The problem is, like, when we really did the math of like salary, like we know of like people in the office, and we're like, this is kind of where it comes out to. But you know, the limited edition is part of also the idea, like, if it did, it's part of, I guess, the joke at one level, kind of its rarity or not, and then, but also the reality of like when we sold, we mostly gave them away, but like we do sell one. And the first one we sold, it was we were freaking out because we never thought of how do you package it. You know, and it was like a 3-day exercise in packaging or something in the office. Maybe it was even longer, right? How long did it take us to figure out how to package one?
3 weeks.
Yeah, 3 weeks. Yeah, it was like.
Fortunately, we knew the person who bought it, so
Yeah.
they understood.
Yeah.